am really pleased to introduce Jenna Nicholas and Chris Rurik. Jenna is from the Phoenix Global Impact, and Chris Rurik is from the Russell Family Foundation. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and then have a quick minute to get a sense of who's in the room with us. So, Jenna and Chris, could you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Sure. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being on the line today. Really looking forward to engaging with you all. I'm Jenna. I'm originally from London and been based in the US for the past 7 years. And Phoenix Global Impact is an impact investing consultancy. We work with different funders in the impact investing space on strategy. And for the past couple of years, I've had the pleasure of helping to project manage Divest-Invest Philanthropy, which we will be talking more about shortly.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm a next generation board member of the Russell Family Foundation. From Tacoma, Washington originally, now calling you from Denver, Colorado, where I live. And I've actually had the opportunity to see the divestment journey from two different angles. One as an alumnus of Stanford University, where I've been involved with the Fossil-Free Stanford campaign, which is student-run but alumni-supported, and getting to see it from a more activist viewpoint, where we're doing anything possible to possibly get our voices heard in the boardroom. But then also as a member of the Russell Family Foundation board, where I came in and realized, like, wow, we could just vote to divest right now and be done with it. So two interesting perspectives, and I'll be telling you about our journey on the Russell Family Foundation and why it wasn't so simple as I expected, nor should it have been. Thank you.
Awesome. So we want to get a sense of who's here with us today. I'm going to do a quick poll to ask you a little bit more about your employer and where you guys are in the divestment conversation. So first, curious to hear what best describes your employer. If you could just take a moment to vote on which of these options is the best fit for your, to describe your workplace. Great, thanks. So it looks like about a third of you are from foundations, a third from philanthropic advisory firms, and then the other third split between nonprofit and other. Cool. Now we want to learn a little bit more about where you guys are in the conversation. So if you could just go ahead and answer where your employer's divestment kind of conversation process is. What's the best fit for you from this list? Great, almost everyone. Awesome. So it looks like a lot of folks here to learn more. Awesome. We're excited to make that possible. So right now I am going to do my best to switch this over to Jenna, who's going to run the slides and take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you so much here. Let me make sure the slides, can everybody see my slides?
Yes, if you can put them in full screen mode, I think will be perfect.
Okay, perfect. Let's do that here and to full screen. Great. So, you know, as was mentioned by Chris, this is really, it's been exciting to see the momentum and traction that this divestment and investment movement has taken place over the previous years. And it really started with the idea, and it started with university students like Chris and many others who were putting pressure on university endowments to look at their endowment and the investments of the endowment. And as mission-driven, tax-exempt organizations looking at what is the responsibility of these institutions. And has since grown to be part of the foundations, which we were primarily focused on today, but also faith-based groups, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and individuals, and recognizing this is something that all individuals can do with their own assets. And what's powerful about this is really looking at what is the motivation for individuals and institutions to engage in this work. And we see here, this is a photo that was taken from the People's Climate March that took place last September 2014 in New York, where 400,000 people were marching through the streets of New York, really demanding action on climate change. Some of you might have even been there. And really seeing that the power of divestment is more than just a sale of an asset. It is this representation of a movement of people that are coalescing around a common cause and really stating that business as usual is no longer acceptable. And we see on this next slide a number of the foundations that have joined Divest-Invest Philanthropy. It started in January 2014 with 17 foundations, pioneering foundations, really leading the charge on this, the Russell Family Foundation being one of them, and Chris will talk more about their work and process, and has since grown. We now have approximately 120 foundations that have joined the movement from all around the world, representing approximately $10 billion in assets under management. And this is part of, as I mentioned, a much broader movement of institutions that have over $2 trillion of total assets under management, which we just announced at the recent UN Climate Summit this past September. So just as a little bit of background about divestment and sort of some of the financial case for why divestment makes sense. So some of you may know of the $27 trillion of carbon underground. Only $7 trillion of this is actually burnable. And so this $20 trillion differential is known as the carbon bubble. And what we argue is that the current valuation of fossil fuel companies doesn't take this into consideration. And what this means in practice is that in order to keep climate change within the 2 degrees Celsius increase that climate scientists warn we must do, this carbon cannot be burned. And so it builds in the sort of immediacy of this challenge and the importance of action to be taken around this. But there's, of course, the very strong ethical and environmental arguments as well. And so that's really some of the argument on the divest. I'm happy to go more into that in the Q&A. And then on the invest side, we're really keen to emphasize that we can't disentangle the divestment piece from the investment piece. And what we're seeing, and a number of the foundations that joined the Wallace Global Fund and the Russell Family Foundation being great examples of this, have really been pioneers in looking at across their endowment, across all asset classes, what are examples of invest solutions, whether it's in renewable energy, energy storage, water purification, agriculture, and seeing the increasing opportunities both on the private equity side with funds like DBL and the Africa Renewable Energy Fund, but also on more of the fixed income side with green bonds from the World Bank and others. And so really, we'll be engaging more in the Q&A, but there's a call to action here, particularly in the lead up to December, where the COP21 will be taking place in Paris. We're at a really critical time in terms of our ability to be able to influence action that's taken around this, and recognizing, again, this is both something that we can do individually, whether it's with our 401k plans at any organization that we're affiliated with, putting pressure on university campuses and where we are alumni, but also amongst foundations themselves. And great parallels have been drawn between the divestment movement from fossil fuels and the divestment movement from apartheid South Africa. And Desmond Tutu has been a huge spokesperson for both of these movements and really stating that business as usual is no longer acceptable. And so just to walk through the 4 stages here. The first stage is really to pledge, and this part is simple, and we'll come back to this later, but the website is just divestinvest.org, and you can sign up there as an individual or any organization that you're affiliated with, and there are additional resources there. And then the divest part, and there's a tool called the Carbon Tracker 200 or the Carbon Underground 200, and this states the top 200 worst fossil fuel companies. And it's a great tool to be able to go to financial advisors and say, I want to be out of all of these fossil fuel companies, and is really a great starting point for the divestment process. The invest side, as we talked about, really across all asset classes, and then by joining this movement, recognizing that you're part of a community of practice of institutions and individuals that are increasing all around the world that are taking action in this way. So I'm going to now pass over to Chris, who's going to talk a little bit more about his own personal perspective and the role of the Russell Family Foundation in all of this.
Thanks, Jenna. Yeah, it's hard to believe that the Russell Family Foundation has been on this journey for 3 years now. It started when 2 of our board members attended a talk by Bill McKibben in Seattle, in which he laid out the logic of the carbon bubble and presented divestment as a way of taking meaningful action on climate change. The Russell Family Foundation, we're a mid-sized family foundation based in Tacoma, Washington. Our programs are focused locally on environment, leadership development, and education. We didn't necessarily have a place in our programs for divestment, but we have always thought of our investments as a big part of our mission as well. Our board is not uniform. I think when the idea of a divestment was first presented, we all reacted differently. We span a lot of different spectrums in the boardroom. And so we all knew that it would be a potentially divisive topic to talk about, and an idea that would challenge us personally as well as a foundation. The system that our CEO devised to go about researching how we might think about if we want to divest or not, he summarized in a compass diagram. So Jenna, if you could skip to the next slide. There it is. So we basically looked in four, we basically looked in 4 directions to see how divestment would impact our work and if we would want to go for it or not. First, we looked externally by conducting research and interviews with investment advisors, impact investors, and other folks who might be knowledgeable about the impact that divestment would have both on our portfolio and if it would effectively send the message that we wanted to send. We looked internally also to review our own portfolio to see what exposure we had to carbon-intensive industries. Probably most importantly, we did an anonymous self-survey of the board so that we could all have an idea of where we stood on the idea of divestment and climate change in general. We looked retrospectively at our legacy, both as a foundation and as a family company before that, with a strong legacy of leadership in the investment industry. And we look forward to see if we could determine how divestment would fit in with our mission as a foundation and our goals as investors. So 6 months later, we reconvened as a board to really talk about this idea. And it became, there were a number of points that came up, a number of questions that had to be answered for ourselves, all of which were interconnected, but different in their own ways. We started off talking a lot about fiscal responsibility and asking the question of whether or not divestment would cripple our ship, or if we actually believed in the carbon bubble logic at all, which kind of led to a more underlying question of priorities in our investments and that is, do our investments drive our mission, or does our mission drive our investments? Are we unwilling to compromise the diversity of our portfolio because we want to get those solid returns so that we can run our programs more effectively, or do we see our investments as part of the whole overarching mission for the foundation? And speaking of our mission, it wasn't like a foregone conclusion that the idea of divestment fit with our mission at all, so we had to hash that out as well. And then we talked about, well, what kind of message would we be sending with divestment? Financially, we were pretty much all in agreement that it might not hurt these coal and oil companies, but we knew that it would be a symbolic gesture, especially considering our track record of leadership in the investment industry. And so we then had to answer the question, are we comfortable with the publicity that would come with divestment, and would we want to take on a leadership role within a growing movement like that? Ultimately, we decided to divest at that point from the Filthy 15, which is a nickname given to the 15 largest coal companies, and to take leadership and speak out about our decision, which became our involvement in Divest-Invest Philanthropy. I guess there's a lot more to be said about that. I'll save it for the questions, but I wanted to just jump forward to this year when we actually, I guess if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's that divestment is not necessarily a one and done decision. It's an iterative process. We divested from 15 coal companies, which meant pulling 2 of our major investment, about $10 million of investments, and reinvesting it in other places. That was not all in those companies. It was in commingled funds that had positions in those 15 companies. But as we started thinking this year about if we wanted to go further with divestment and go deeper, we took a couple of steps. At first, we were thinking kind of like pie in the sky, like what could we do next? Maybe we could divest of the whole coal industry, not just the Filthy 15. We thought maybe we could divest of the top 200 oil, gas, and combustible fuel companies. Maybe we could slice it another way and look at companies that have the most proven carbon reserves. Maybe we need to look even deeper and divest of all carbon-intensive industries, which is where it starts to get crazy. But what was really helpful for us was not looking at it in such like an abstract way, but really going at a granular level through our portfolio and seeing where our positions were, and what next steps we might take. So we found out that we had overall relatively little exposure to the coal and oil industries already, which felt good. And then we saw several low-hanging fruit opportunities of funds where maybe it was a separate account where we could ask the investor to reallocate some of the money invested in coal and oil. Other ones would be much more difficult. So we decided, you know what, we're just going to go for the stuff that seems easy at this point, and reinvest those things and keep taking it at a step-by-step approach. And so that's really, there's no end to this story because that's where we're at today. And we continue to think about this, talk about this with others, and encourage others to consider divestment. And with that, I think we're ready to open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Chris. Great. We'll have to check out some of the questions here. So anyone who has any questions, we have a few that's come through here, but please feel free to type up on the tab on the GoToWebinar any questions that you have.
This is good. Just while folks are typing in their questions, I'm curious. The Russell Family Foundation obviously was a great example. I'm curious if there are other outstanding examples that you recommend folks look to in terms of other foundations they can look up either case studies or examples of online?
Yeah, so on the Divest-Invest website, so it's just divestinvest.org /resources. We have a number of the seminal research that's been done in this space. Mercer did some research earlier this year, which really made the great sort of financial case for divesting. Impacts Asset Management have done some work which compares fossil-free portfolios and their performance to those with fossil fuels and shows an outperformance from fossil-free portfolios. So that's great research that's out there. Arabella Advisors put together a report in the lead up to the summit we mentioned in September, which details some of the trends that we're seeing amongst the different sectors that are joining and sort of tracks some of the commitments that have taken place over the past year, so from the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund and AXA Insurance and others. And we're actually just about to publish in the next month or so some case studies that we've put together of some of the foundations, including the Russell Family Foundation, that have joined Divest-Invest Philanthropy and really sharing their story and some of the challenges that they overcame in the process of doing that. So that should be out in the next month or so. It's a great question.
So there's another great question here. Is there a financial return trade-off that occurs when divesting and investing in socially or environmentally conscious institutions? Is there any concrete research on this? Thanks for that question. It's definitely something, one of the very first things we wanted to know when we considered divestment. And you know, the truth is, like any projection about return trade-offs is going to be a little bit sketchy. There were a couple factors that helped sway our decision. One was the logic of the carbon bubble. We do believe that either those assets are going to be stranded as the world addresses climate change, or we're going to be stranded, and we wanted to be a proactive part of the solution. Another, some groups have done backwards analysis of if you had taken out coal and gas companies from your portfolios either 10 or 20 years ago. We did this with our portfolio and saw that the difference in return was really like negligible, nothing. Jenna, is there more you want to say about that?
Yeah, just a couple of points, and it's all great points. I think one of the questions that comes up a lot around this is sometimes foundations will argue, well, is it within our fiduciary responsibility to engage in this? And actually, we would argue that it is within the fiduciary responsibility to divest from fossil fuels and to invest in new energy solutions, partly because we've actually seen with the falling prices of fossil fuel companies over the past couple of years that making the financial case for continuing to invest in fossil fuels is actually becoming an increasingly challenging position to uphold. And we see examples like the Wallace Global Fund's portfolio, and where they divested about 4 or 5 years ago now, and they've continued to divest more of their assets since. But they've actually been outperforming the S&P 500 and doing really well in the process of this divestment. So I think sometimes there's this illusion that by divesting there is this sort of you're going to lose money in the process of doing that, but often that isn't the case.
And there's different levels of divestment and reinvestment. We at first just applied kind of like exclusionary screens to our investments so that we made sure that we wouldn't have those filthy 15 coal companies in our portfolio. But slowly we've been building up more investments that are more targeted into renewables and clean energy. And yeah, honestly, it's too soon to say. We have a long-term investment strategy and a long-range way of thinking, so it's too soon to say how it's affected our own investments.
Definitely. So we have another great question here, which is, when the interest to divest doesn't come from the board, how can program staff seed the conversation? And it's a really fantastic question. And we've seen a huge amount of diversity across the 120 foundations that have joined Divest-Invest Philanthropy in terms of where the initial interest comes from. So sometimes it is from board members, sometimes it's from the CEO, but sometimes it is from staff. And I think all can play a really important role in being ambassadors of the work. And I think part of it is whoever it is playing the role of that ambassador really getting up to speed with the arguments on both sides around this, and recognizing that depending on the size of the organization, the thematic focus, the geography, there's many different kind of considerations that come into play, that tailoring some of the arguments and the way in which they're presented to other staff members and to the board eventually is really important. So, for example, making the argument in particular about the kind of the as mission-driven organizations, like part of what is sort of, when we think about it externally, it's sort of crazy about how the philanthropic industry has developed, where there is such a bifurcation between the investments the foundations make and the grant giving. So part of it is just a recognition of that and looking at ways in which having more of an alignment between the investments and the grant making teams and the sort of orientation there, and presenting it. I mean, often the financial case is one of the strongest to start with, because it's ultimately that's going to be what the investment team has to assess is this financially viable for us to do. But I think compiling all of that information again, much of which is on the Divest-Invest website, and then presenting it to key other stakeholders within the foundation that can help to also be ambassadors of this, and then eventually sort of bringing it up to the board and recognizing that given the different stance of various people on the board, there might need to be more one-on-one conversations with particular board members to also get them up to speed. And as I say, these case studies that we have, which highlights a lot of some of these subtleties between different foundations and their approaches, we'll make sure to share that with the whole group as well as soon as that's published. But Chris, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Not really. I mean, I come from the perspective of a board member, so it's hard for me to say, but I just would love to reiterate Jenna's point about breaking down the wall between the finances and the programs. I think my idealism as a millennium will come out a little bit here, but I do believe that we're coming into an age where alignment is going to be a main theme of life, and it'll be harder and harder to wall off mentally the investment mindset from the program's mindset, and I hope that continues.
Is there anybody who's not on the computer but just has a question, wants to go off mute for a moment to ask the question?
I know you spoke a little bit about alumni and kind of university investment, and it sounds like the website is a great place to check out some examples of that. But kind of broader communities like universities, is there in the end much difference between the messaging or what helps get the ball rolling, or do you think that there's learnings that maybe can point towards the staff question around the alumni voice and its value in a university's investment strategy?
That's a really good question, and I think the way I would respond is that at the Russell Family Foundation, we often remind ourselves that we're a public trust, and as a public trust, we have a responsibility to use both our grants and our investments in a publicly beneficial way. And I think the same is totally true of a university. And that's the fossil-free Stanford movement. I know has been trying to hit on that theme that you have these scientists working through Stanford that are coming out with a lot of research on climate change and what needs to happen to address it. And meanwhile, much of the endowment is invested in these industries that are working directly contrary to what we need to be doing. And I think, yeah, just that concept of public trust is so powerful that we have a responsibility to use our resources in a publicly beneficial way.
Great. Well, I think that that's a very high note. Questions may still be trickling in. I'm happy to make more time if folks want to type them in. I don't know if you guys have any final points you want to make sure we make before we close out the call, but I would love to kind of open it up to your final thoughts now, Chris and Jenna.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about this if anyone has further questions down the road. Don't hesitate to reach out. And it's just like I said, it's hard to believe it's been 3 years that we've been on this journey, and so far it's been all good. And I encourage all of you to join if possible.
Great. Jenna, do you have any final words for the group? I think you're on mute. I tried to unmute you. Yeah. Do you have any final words for the group? Seems like we're having a technical difficulty. Okay, well, I'm sorry that it's not working. If you can jump in and cut me off, feel free to, Jenna. But I know that there is a lot that can be learned from. Hi, can you hear?
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know what was.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Keeps cutting in and out.
Hello.
Hi. Go ahead.
Can you hear me or not? No.
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. Just talking about the importance of this coordination amongst the different sectors. So this last question about the sort of coordination amongst universities and foundations, similarly across all of the different sectors. And over the past year, we've been sharing lots of resources amongst all of us and recognizing, as I mentioned earlier, this is the power of each of us individually. And whether it is as program staff within organizations or as philanthropic advisors, really sort of taking this on as our cause and really recognizing the power that we can have to really change the way business is done. I think part of the testimony of all of this is seeing how within fossil fuel companies, this is becoming something that they're talking about at the board level, and that really the momentum that this has gathered, I think, is beyond what any of us really imagined, and that we're really at a tipping point in terms of the conversations here. And so it's a really exciting time, and really appreciate all of your interest in this and look forward to following up.
Great. So this is Biz from EPIP. I just want to ask everyone to join me in thanking the group. I know you can't clap, but if we were together, this would be the moment for that. I'm going to pop up the screen again with the website where you can go and learn about the resources that Jenna spoke about, divest-invest.org. And you can always reach out to me at biz@epip.org, help you connect with Jenna and Chris directly, and hopefully help you continue these conversations. But we are also very grateful and excited about this movement and the work you are both doing. So thank you so much for sharing it with us. Thank you so much for offering this portal for us to climb through, and excited to hear how folks' work progresses from here. So thank you from the EPIP team, and thank you to all our members and non-members who joined today. We're really excited to have you with us. Please take that minute to fill out the survey, and look forward to seeing you all back here for more webinars down the line.
Thanks so much, Biz, and thanks everyone else.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.